complex kind of joining together of all these different things. The NHS tends to classify mothers as a single independent unit, whether as a woman, a patient, or a mother. And at various points in time, with the rise and the fall of governments or the ebb and flow of beliefs and ideas, they've really grappled with how to define the role of fathers, partners, and families, and how to include these social dynamics in a healthcare model. And over time, some really good policy and practice guidance for health professionals has been developed, from midwives to health visitors, which explicitly addresses the importance of including dads, from the Healthy Child Programme to guidance from the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, NHS England's maternity review in 2016, and then guidance from the Royal College of Midwives endorsed by the Department of Health in 2011, as well as the NICE antenatal and postnatal guidance. However, the current pandemic default for father is visitor. At the Fatherhood Institute, we know, and it's obvious, what expectant fathers do and feel also affects mothers in a myriad of really different ways. So what dads eat, how much they smoke or drink, how much exercise they do, how they feel about breastfeeding, and the state of their mental health. And what dads do also impacts on how well babies do. And well-prepared, confident fathers are really critical advocates for mothers. They're active witnesses of the labouring journey, and they notice and they remember things that many mums may not recall. They help reduce women's perception of pain. They reassure them, and they notice and act when something isn't right, when the baby blues become entrenched, or when post-birth bleeding becomes a concern, becomes something more serious. And this is particularly important for Black women who are still disproportionately at risk of poor birth outcomes. So over the past few decades, dad's presence at the birth has become largely normalised and expected. Almost all partners at the time of the birth are the baby's biological dads, with 95% present at the birth. And among teenage mothers, only about 2.2% have a new partner at the time of the birth. So pre-pandemic, in addition to attending routine antenatal appointments, more than 90% of expectant dads attended scans. But in spite of this, and all the high-level policy guidance explicitly recommending the inclusion of dads, the practices of each trust and the attitude of individual staff has always really varied. And these factors can have a disproportionate impact on how things go for couples. This is from our 2018 survey of dads at the birth called "How Was It For You, Dad?" After the birth, I was treated as a nuisance and was in the way. I was told to leave immediately after my wife was brought to the ward with a baby. She was high on medication from a forceps delivery, exhausted, full of wires, and a catheter was hanging out of her. She was starving. She hadn't eaten at all that day. I felt like a spare part, but I could have helped her. I could have helped her and the baby while she was establishing breastfeeding after being in labour for 18 hours. But the midwives told my wife I wasn't allowed to stay to respect the other women. So I drove home after the birth and I nearly crashed my car. Our work training health professionals across the UK over the past 2 decades confirms this mixed experience. Sometimes dads are treated with respect, sensitivity and care from outstanding professionals. And sometimes they're dismissed, ignored, excluded. And often professionals are ambivalent and not clear how to engage with fathers and whether they should. So, into this context, as COVID-19 lockdowns began, and despite clear guidance from the World Health Organization to continue to allow birth partners, most NHS trusts in England and elsewhere, almost 80% began to exclude dads from scans until active labour was established and restrict access to postnatal wards. We are still mid-pandemic, and the full impact of these ongoing restrictions on mums and dads and babies is difficult to quantify, and maybe it's too soon to quantify. But since late spring, we've surveyed almost 1,800 couples, mainly but not exclusively mother-father partnerships. We've also been talking to health professionals to capture the experience and the impacts of becoming a father during the pandemic. The survey is still live, and I think there's a link in the chat. So please do share it. We want to have really broad contributions from as many different communities as possible. But what I'm going to talk about next are some of the emerging themes and the stories that have come from the research. And we'll be aiming to report more fully on what we find and the implications next year. So I think during the pandemic, all of us have been bombarded with very grim statistics, which tell stories of loss and exclusion and isolation and separation from people we love in their last years. David talked at the beginning about all the thoughts about care homes and so on. So when it came to reviewing the statistical findings of our survey, it took a while to grasp how huge the scale of the exclusion of dads has been and continues to be, and how commonplace the accounts of fear and isolation experienced by mums, and how much disappointment and regret lies behind these statistics and the stories which comprise them. So some of the headlines. So 80% of those surveyed were white English, good proportion were Welsh. 6% of partners of fathers were Black or Asian or from a minority ethnic group. The majority of dads live in the same household as mums. 54% are between 24 and 34, 32% between 35 and 44, with 5% between 18 and 24, younger dads. 1/3 of women had previously lost a baby, and 12% had had a previous traumatic or premature birth. So 81% of dads weren't allowed to attend antenatal appointments. There was no other option for taking part, no video streaming option. Only 1/4 of dads were permitted to attend a cesarean section. And 84% of dads, almost all dads, told us they felt less able to support mum than they would have wanted to be able to. And 65% said they felt less well prepared to become a father than they would have liked. 1/3 said they felt the mother and or the baby's health was put at risk. And then what about mothers? What did mothers tell us? So mothers told us how forcefully, how devastating the exclusion of fathers has been for them. When we asked them for their advice for other couples having babies in a pandemic, they said, don't expect your partner to be considered at all. He isn't thought about or cared about. And I have no advice because the hospital aren't willing to change anything. It causes massive amounts of stress on couples with dads feeling left out. But luckily we've communicated and we've understood each other's fears about this, but not everyone will cope the same. And finally, I have absolutely no advice for other couples. I'm really struggling with my pregnancy due to feeling so detached after going to appointments alone. Receiving bad news alone, perhaps having to tell your baby's dad that his baby has died, receiving good news alone, a really positive 20-week scan without being able to do so together, or feeling pressured into making decisions without the chance to talk or think them through, like a cesarean or an induction. Labouring alone and afraid or in pain without the person that you made your baby with to comfort you, to reassure you or advocate for you. Huge issues. And then what did fathers say? Well, fathers told us about a huge sense of loss, missing out on experiences they anticipated, looked forward to, prepared for. Some are stoical and were stoical, particularly those reporting from the early phases of the pandemic. But some were disillusioned and others were traumatized. And every single father was deeply concerned and worried about their baby's mothers coping alone. And when we asked dads for advice for future dads, what did they say? Don't have a baby during a pandemic. And then wait till it's over if you can. It's not a nice experience. This is my third baby, and I think provision for fathers is awful. And take a sleeping bag, a phone charger, food, headache pills, just in case you're stuck in a car park for 6 days and 5 nights like I was. And then setting scenarios to cover all the eventualities really helped me, and we communicated well, which also helps. And finally, brace yourself. Don't be afraid to challenge. Every midwife is really different. Some are lovely. Others clearly don't want dads or birth partners to be there. And some will find a way to have a go at you, however hard you try. But at the same time, others will be really friendly and supportive. So perhaps a key narrative for fatherhood around pregnancy and birth in a pandemic is the fathers are doing it for themselves. It's really clear that this is a feature of fatherhood as usual, which has been multiplied. The pandemic has been extraordinary. But dads have always faced an unclear situation when it comes to pregnancy and birth. They're often dismissed or ignored, and they often have to figure it out for themselves. And that's particularly the case for more excluded fathers, very young fathers, fathers who don't speak English as their first language and so on. And then survey responses from practitioners confirmed this sense of a sort of mixed experience for families, a very mixed experience, some good, some bad. Without robust training and really clear policies and protocols and resources to support the involvement of dads, midwives and practitioners and fathers have to make it up for themselves. Practitioners told us it's really hard to provide the level of emotional and practical support that some women need when their partners are absent, say during an induction or on a postnatal ward preparing feeds. And someone else told us, I've seen the severe emotional and psychological effects for dads missing out on really important interactions with their partners and newborns. Lots of professionals commented on how easy it's been without fathers or men to attend to, but this is not my view. Then finally, practitioners said, our service has encountered parents who've been traumatized by their birth experience, and the lack of support has had a really negative impact on their mental health. It's clearer than ever before that the transition to fatherhood is a really crucial moment, critical for mothers and really impacting future outcomes for babies and for fathers themselves. But without really robust policies, rigorous training for health professionals, then dads, mums and midwives have to make it up for themselves. And this can produce beautiful, creative, empathetic solutions, but also sometimes dismissal, contempt and exclusion driven by unconscious bias. So what needs to happen to transform the experience of fatherhood in a pandemic, and what can we learn as we retrieve a semblance of normal life? So we've been part of a campaign called #ButNotMaternity. We've been lobbying NHS England to update its guidance, and we've been lobbying hospital trusts and MPs. For dads who are at an early phase of pregnancy, or for people who know dads at this phase, why not make your own birth plan, flexible enough to adapt and alter? Birth is a great unknown, however well prepared we are. The constraints of COVID have added new uncertainty and complexity, and you can, at the very least, make some plans for all eventualities. What if I have to sleep in my car? How can I stay connected to my baby's mother and my baby if I can't be there with them? And how can I find support? Who can support me if I have to spend time away from my new family? For couples who have the energy and the strength to fight for your right to be present throughout the maternity journey, then do join the But Not Maternity campaign. There are campaign template letters there, or you can write to your hospital trust and let them know respectfully you intend to be present at each scan, appointment, throughout labour and postnatally. Dads and partners who take this approach are gaining concessions. They're changing things for themselves and those who follow. And for dads who've missed out on some key early moments of fatherhood and bonding, they can build strong connections with their baby through periods of solo care, a chance to get the hang of caring for a very young baby or a child, which isn't innate for mums or dads, and which both need to practice in order to learn. And in order to make this work, mums may need to step away from the role of expert parent. This can feel hard, but it makes space for dads to learn and get to grips with fatherhood. The more competent each of you is, the greater scope there is for both of you to share care and work in future, and the greater the benefits for your children. Thank you.
Well, Katherine, thank you very much for that fantastic presentation. It was really, really excellent. I mean, one of the things that I'm really keen to do is to assist, if I can, with publicising what's happening. It really feels to me that this should be a little bit more widely known. And I wonder if my office can help to try and get this on radio or telly, if that's helpful and it's at the right stage to do that. But I think these stories and the experiences are heartrending, and the public should hear what's happening if that's helpful.
I think that would be extremely helpful. It's something we hoped you'd say. I think what's very striking about this campaign is it's led by 5 or 6 organisations focused on maternal care. So in a sense, kind of women-focused organisations. And the Fatherhood Institute is the sole kind of father-focused organisation. So they're doing a pretty amazing job of telling the story of the exclusion of fathers and partners from the process. They're pretty amazing. It would be great to think more about how we can tell.
I think it should be on Women's Hour.
Yes, I think that would be incredible. And I think it's very interesting. There's this wish to sort of pull apart the couple instead of thinking about what's going on within the couple relationship and how interdependent mothers and fathers actually are. And this idea that fathers are a visitor really sort of sets them up as a kind of something very external to this process, which they have been intrinsically involved in creating.
And do we think that we've got case studies? Have we got families that might speak, do we think?
Yes.
That's what always helps things come alive, if you've actually got couples that might speak.
Yes.
Well, I'm happy to use my office with the contacts we've got to chase down a few journalists. We've obviously got good contacts with The Guardian, but I can see this on Woman's Hour, a bit more magazine-y, which then might get pick up, across different outlets, because a lot of people listen to it, it feels to me. So I'm happy to try and help that, pick that up after this.
Fabulous, thank you.
Great. Owen, I'm going to let you marshal the news or comments, chat and things and questions, I think, from others.
Yeah, I mean, thanks very much, Katherine. Again, a really powerful and insightful presentation. I'm really grateful to have you here today to do that. And I also, just on the points David was making there about media coverage, we were ourselves at FutureMan really lucky in the last few weeks to have been able to be part of a Zoom conversation with the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, who both have a specific interest in both fathers and the early years. You may be aware that the Duchess of Cambridge launched a big survey recently about attitudes towards the early years, and we're very supportive of the idea of putting things in place to support parents as early as possible. So I'm hoping that there is still some media interest lurking around us after this because of that, and hopefully we can direct them towards you as well, and kind of try and coordinate our responses and make sure that we're all kind of pushing in the same direction about changes for fathers at this earliest possible stage.
Brilliant.
At the moment, I'm just monitoring the chat, and there are lots of nice comments. One from Dr. Yancy Ralston that says, thanks for the great presentation. Are there any voices for non-binary parents about their unfortunate experiences of maternity services during COVID, especially female presenting male parents and the discrimination that they have faced?
We have given you some headline findings today. So we haven't combed through them in fine detail and looked at individual responses. So we'll be able to come back to you on that when we publish at some point next year. I think did I say, I've forgotten, I need to go back, but about 2% of the sample were same-sex couples, but I haven't gone down into the detail. I imagine their experiences are also awful.
Yeah, thanks for that, and we look forward to the full report when it's available. I have another question from John Adams, and it's a technical one. He says, was this survey done in England and Wales or UK-wide?
UK-wide, but we happen to have a disproportionately large sample from Wales because we've got a very, very good contact list from Wales. But yes, it was across the UK, and the experience was different. I mean, interestingly, NHS England has been slower to introduce guidance recommending that partners, in the autumn, they recommended that partners were included, although the final decision was for NHS trusts. But I think Scotland and Wales were ahead of the curve there and sorted out these things ahead of England.
Great, thanks very much. Another question from the participants, I think this was from James at workingdads.co.uk. Should the government extend paternity leave to give men more time to bond, given they may have been less involved in the birth? And perhaps David might have an opinion on this one as well, maybe.
Is David still here? Does he want to go?
I'm on mute, but I am still here.
Yeah. The question was about should paternity leave be extended to give men more chance to bond, especially during this period where if they've not been able to be present at birth.
I think that raises broader issues about parental leave, full stop, the take up of men within that and the balance within that, which is an ongoing discussion certainly within this all-party group, but I think within Parliament, and there are differences of perspective. So I think that raises slightly bigger questions, to be honest, about whether we've got the balance right. And I think most people think that we haven't quite.
No, I'd agree with that. And I think that we would say that critical for that building bonding with babies early it's all about fathers having periods of solo care. So some period of protected leave for fathers is really important, a sort of use it or lose it, father only leave. But I think the whole system needs to be shaken up and rebuilt. And Maternity Alliance have just published some new thinking on what leave should look like. It's quite radical. So do go, and I can't remember the detail, but I would have a look at what they've got to say on this, and I think we would be behind that.
Thank you, Kathy. We have got a question from one of our parliamentarians who's attending, Andrew Sellis MP. If I could just find him, Andrew, would you mind unmuting yourself and asking your question directly?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Great presentation, and I think similar to some of the findings from a report from the Centre for Social Justice quite recently. So obviously, many people coming up with the same conclusions. I wanted to ask about a different area, though, to find out if anyone is doing any work sort of targeted towards the sort of young men who are not really interested in bringing up their children at all. I mean, the fathers we've heard cited, sound like they're all really good guys, all really trying to do the right thing, struggling with some of the services that are being provided. But there's a whole other cohort, isn't there, of young men who sadly, haven't really understood the sort of joys and delights and rewards of fatherhood, along with the frustrations and the the many challenges which all of us face as fathers. But is anyone doing any work to try and reach those young men who just don't really want to get stuck in, are happy to father children and have no ongoing involvement with the mothers of their children? Because that always seems to me an area which doesn't really get any attention. I've not seen any campaigns in that area. Perhaps I've missed them, but I'd be really interested in that area, please. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrew. So that's MP. I mean, I know I've got a couple of colleagues on the line here who work in agencies, particularly Sue Pettigrew, who works for St Michael's Fellowship, who, like ourselves here at Future Men, does run specific projects working with more marginalised and younger fathers. I think we as an organisation would take some issue with the idea that undoubtedly there are fathers out there that exist who are not necessarily fulfilling their role around their parental duties, but there are often, we find through our outreach and engagement of these fathers, a number of factors that can contribute to their lack of engagement or involvement, or perceived lack of engagement or involvement on occasion. Poverty, of course, being a major factor. Sometimes there are social and economic, as well as actually family law issues that preclude some men from being involved as much as they would like to with their children. I mean, we've taken the approach over the years, and I joined this organisation to be a young fathers development worker, which means I went out, and we still have staff that do this within our team, to find young men who are not known by services, who maybe were not recorded as fathers by any statutory body. And actually the only statutory body that does record information about a man, or especially a young man's status as a father, is actually the prison service. So there is a big gap in the data that we're recording. Katherine might be able to kind of correct me if I'm wrong there about other agencies that are uniformly and as a matter of fact collecting data about fathers. Obviously, with the registry of birth of children, we collect information about the father of a child, but not everyone is present or able to or allowed to, sometimes because of the status of the relationship with mum, to be present during those processes. I think you're right that there are a lack of campaigns around fathers who are not those who self-select as being involved. And I think, you know, we do need to re-establish a big push around kind of a positive promotion of the benefits of fathers, and actually looking at trying to deconstruct some of the barriers to those men and put support in place to ensure that they can play a role in their lives and their children, because we all agreed, and that all the research shows, that children with positively involved fathers do much better. And through our experience, the fathers themselves who actually get to play a role positively parenting their children find purpose, direction, and a focus to actually help them with other aspects of their lives as well. So I'll stop there, and if anyone else on the panel or anyone else attended today wants to say anything about non-resident parents or parents who maybe don't play such an active role and the barriers they face or things we can do to support them, please do make yourselves known or put something in the chat.
I mean, I would say, I think it's often the default position when we think about fathers and fatherhood is to think about that very small cohort, that very small number of fathers who aren't engaged with their children. But the reality is that almost all fathers sign the birth certificate now, including fathers of teenage mothers, so very young fathers. And I think, Andrew, in a way, I feel that you need to sort of present some more evidence about who are these fathers that you're thinking about. Who are they? Where are they? Are you hearing about them through your surgeries and so on? Who tells you these stories? Because I think, in a way, some of this is quite mythic.
Can I just respond? Yeah. A little bit interactive. I mean, to be honest, I meet their mothers probably most Friday afternoons. Yes. In my surgery. So it's literally what I see with the evidence of my own eyes. Yeah. My wife helps in 2 different food banks. I hear similar stories from her of just no involvement whatsoever. with the dad. So yeah, and it, not entirely all cases where there's been domestic violence either. You know, I'm baffled sometimes and greatly saddened almost always as to why it's the case. But obviously, you know, it's partly anecdotal, but it is sort of physical evidence what I see Friday by Friday. But I don't have a data set to show you, you know, other than what I see with my own eyes.
Thank you. No, that's good to have a sort of fuller response. And I think the other thing that we know, you know, we've done a great deal of work in some of the better start areas, which are in Blackpool and Nottingham and in Southend and so on. And I think again, often the way that our public, our social services are set up and so on, really sort of mitigate against fathers being actively involved or publicly involved. So the way the benefit system works and so on, it's often better for fathers to conceal their fatherhood. I mean, it's often more desirable within a couple to do that, because there are penalties for acknowledging that you're present. So, and again, we know from our research that most fathers live very close to their children, even if they aren't involved with them actively. They are around, and there is lots of scope to involve them.
Thank you. I'm going to go to another question from the panel, if that's okay now, or from our attendees. This one's from Patricia Hamilton, and she asked, could you tell us more about whether ethnicity played a role in exasperated fathers' poor experiences?
We would extrapolate from the findings that we've got so far that inevitably, yes. Something that we did in the earlier phase of the pandemic was we interviewed a small number of Black fathers about their experiences of fatherhood across a lifetime. And we had lots of accounts of exclusion, of advocacy being perceived as aggression. So the example I gave, you know, one of the things I talked about at the beginning was about a hemorrhage, so post-birth hemorrhage. For one of the Black fathers we spoke to told us that he called for help from midwifery team 5 times until they came, by which time his partner was unconscious because she was hemorrhaging. So yes, I think there's definitely an issue there, and we will investigate further. And then the other thing we've done is we've asked healthcare professionals to talk more in their sort of text responses to us about their experiences of racism and exclusion in the system. So we will report on that in due course.
Thank you very much. We had another good question here from Tina Miller, and she asked a slightly different focus question, which is, were there any unexpected positives through the study that you found, early time together at home due to lockdown or even because of furlough conditions?
Yes, not through this survey, but we're also conducting a piece of work funded by the Nuffield Foundation, looking at the experience of the kind of return of the father to the family home during the pandemic. We're seeing huge shifts in the amount of time fathers are spending caring for children, absolutely huge. And we will report on that separately in the new year. And we do think, yes, there are benefits, again, from small samples of fathers we've spoken to. They are benefiting from time together at home without their extended family. So fathers often have this interesting position trying to work out how to not be pushed to the margins, really, I think, when the visitors arrive. So the chance to kind of grapple with new parenthood together seems to be quite positive. But it's hard to balance that against the kind of all the negatives of not having access to children's centres and other support. So I think mums and dads are really having to make it up as they go along, and that's a mixed experience for them.
Thank you. I'm looking, there's another question here from Kevin Brazant, who's from Daddy CPR, and he thanks you, Katherine, for sharing. And he appreciates that the survey focused on the experience of paternity. However, is there any current or recent research regarding the impact of COVID-19 on the engagement of fathers in child protection processes or social services more generally?
We are also conducting a review into non-accidental injury of babies. It's not entirely COVID related. We'll be reporting on that shortly. But basically no, there isn't. The other piece of Nuffield work we're doing is looking at the experience of separated fathers during lockdown. So that may kind of touch on some of the issues that you're raising about social care, but it's not an explicit focus for us.
And I would just, as a follow-up to that, I'd like to point out Nuffield has funded historically over the past 5 to 10 years a lot of research into fathers, especially around fathers engaged with social care settings. So I know that the University of East Anglia did some work around counting fathers in the experiences of recurring fathers in childcare, and I think that research has just been published as we were going into the pandemic. So there's some interesting background reading for you there. Any more from anybody else? We have a question here from Stephen Lydiard, who I believe is a midwife. Could there be more focus within the current midwifery education program to consider fathers and men and their place, role and feelings, etc.?
Absolutely, completely. That would be one of our top kind of recommendations for policy change, I think. We carry out quite a lot of training for midwives and health visitors, and the kind of, as I've said already, I think the range of different perceptions and responses to engaging with fathers is huge. The range of different attitudes we encounter. And I think, and so it does feel very, very important that people are properly trained and held to account, I suppose, in the gentlest possible way for the quality of their practice.
Thanks, great. I just wanted to add a comment from Sue Pettigrew, who I mentioned earlier on, who's the CEO at St Michael's Fellowship, a charity that delivers parenting support in South London. And she's commented, "We have been talking about the marginalisation of fathers, and for young dads, the marginalisation is even greater. They're often not sure of their role, not sure whether they are welcome in antenatal clinics or not. A number of dads don't have the role models within their own families to appreciate the need for their involvement. We are working with young fathers and just starting a new project with dads 21 years and under, which they shall report on." And to back that up and that great work that St Michael's does, we also are maintaining a focus on young fathers through Future Men, and are one of the few organisations, alongside a couple of others who are, if you're here, please do make yourselves known, who provide some antenatal classes specifically for men called the Future Dads classes, which were unfortunately suspended because of our lack of access to the NHS estates because of the COVID measures. We were able to run some pilot schemes online earlier on through some finance donations we were given from ex-participants earlier on, but that money soon ran out. We've just been lucky enough to secure some funding from a CCG and LMS in South East London, and hopefully we'll go public with news about how that will be a free online course for men who are delivering their babies in those 6 boroughs next week. So there are small pockets of practice here and there, but I totally agree with Kathy's assertion that we need national guidance and national models of practice to include men more fully within maternity services. The earlier we get men engaged, the more likely they are to stay engaged with services and with the idea of supporting and accepting help. And I just would like to add very quickly to that, we are also working with an organisation called Best Beginnings, as is Katherine, around developing digital responses for expectant parents. Some may know that there's an app already out for parents, mainly aimed at mums, called Baby Buddy. That is going to have a second iteration, Baby Buddy 2.0, in the new year, with a specific father's pathway designed within it, which the Fatherhood Institute are writing, and we're supporting in kind of doing some testing and garnering fathers' opinions with that. And given the current lack of access to in-person services, I think digital responses are even more important, but should never be seen as a replacement for real human contact and real human intervention. So with that in mind, I would just like to double check again in the chat if there are any more questions before I hand back to David, if he wants to conclude or pull any of this back together. Alex Binder. I saw a question from Alex Binder somewhere. Sorry, I can't find it at the moment. So what I'll do with the please, I'd just like to inform everyone that this has been recorded as a session. I should have mentioned that at the beginning. It was in your invite. We will be posting this as a copy of the meeting notes and agenda to our webpage as we need to. And obviously we will share with those on the mailing list the full report from the Fatherhood Institute when it's made public. And we will try and come back to any questions posed that we weren't able to answer during this time. David, would you mind coming back in at this moment?
Oh, I think Peter Bottomley has a question I can see.
Oh, sorry, Peter.
It was less of a question than, in effect, a rhetorical one.
Thank you.
There are 600,000 babies born each year. Half of them are first children. So it's 300,000 new dads a year. And I'm wondering whether in the mainstream media, they see positive examples of what it's like to be a positive parent, and whether they have any chance of picking up occasionally, ever, never, the sorts of insights and discussion you've been having for the last 40 minutes.
Katherine, do you want to come back in?
I don't really know how to answer that one, except to say that the media loves binary, doesn't it? So it loves the kind of the black and whites of a story and the oppositions. So it loves the idea of kind of feckless fathers and so on. And I think that's why I was thinking about what Andrew was saying about, you know, there are lots of myths about fathers and about mothers, and it's hard to tease out. But I think, yeah.
Can I give you an example? When I took over road casualty reduction, the biggest factor were young men drinking too much alcohol and then driving. And people said you should lower the limit, increase the policing, increase the penalties. We didn't do any of that. And yet the over the limit drink driving fell by about 4/5 quite fast when we said to people, if you're a host, offer alcohol-free drink. If you're a passenger, pick an alcohol-free driver. If you're a drinking driver like me, try to decide whether you're drinking or whether you're driving. So it's 3 practical points that each of us can do, not pointing a finger at other people, not saying it's going to be somebody else's responsibility. So Frank Field and I, at one stage, thought of how you can be a 5-star parent. What are the 5 things you need to do to be a good enough parent? And a rough shies, you know, get each child to school on time each day, having had breakfast in the right clothes. It might be have a meal with another household at least once a fortnight, preferably once a week, so you can socialize. So your child sees you with another parent. Try to be on the best possible terms with your child's other parent. Whether you're married, whether you live together, your child's always got 2 parents. Try to, at least once a week, have a regular after-school activity. So when they say there's never anything to do. And the 5th one might be, if in doubt, the child's interest should come first, but normally there shouldn't be any doubt. And that would be good enough, I think.
Beautiful. Nothing else to say about that.
Thank
you, Peter. I would just, there were one.
That was Grandad speaking there, Peter.
There you go. That's a good point. Just the final one from the floor that I did miss, it did come in earlier and I didn't want to, from Alec Binder. I wondered if we had any further information on plans to look further into the impact on children and fathers of COVID on relationships where they have been interrupted, disrupted or undermined. Firstly to Katherine.
Good question. I mean, we are looking into the experiences of own household fathers, so fathers who don't reside full-time with their children. That's our Nuffield funded stream. And I think what's coming out so far is that some of those fathers have had a pretty unhappy experience during COVID. So we may pick up on some of those themes, I think, as we explore that further. But I think if you know, this is a great forum to say there are people here who are researchers and academics, let's find some cash to fund some more sort of finely grained research into some of these critical areas and into young and excluded fatherhood, Black fatherhood, I think very important.
We hope to, through the mailing list, as I mentioned earlier on in APPG, not only inform you of upcoming meetings and events, but also if there are national campaigns or calls for evidence around those issues, we will, with the chair's permission, of course, share those with the wider mailing list. And hopefully we can kind of get some traction on some of these issues as all of you hope to. And with that, I shall hand back to our chair, David Lammy, for closing statements.
Well, look, thank you very much. Katherine, as I say, I'm happy to assist in getting hoping to get a little bit of coverage of that fantastic work, and at least to get up these issues affecting fathers, because it's I've seen nothing really in relation to the pandemic, save for the issues of domestic violence, particularly. So I think it would be good if we could do that, and perhaps you could come back to me maybe through Owen. I just really need an email to summarize that I can send on to a couple of journalists and broadcast contacts, sort of copying you in to see if they can take it forward. If you could do that, not a long email, because you know journalists have a short attention span, so you probably want to just sort of link and just explain in summary that there are some key findings, really interesting and heartrending stories that could make for you know, an interesting segment. With that, can I thank everyone for attending, and let's see where we are in the new year, whether it will be virtual or to some extent back to normal. I think probably the next meeting will be virtual, because even with the rollout of the vaccine, it will be some time, I think, before we can come together properly. I think we're going to be in the second half of next year before there's any sense of that normality returning. So I suspect that the next meeting will continue to be a virtual one. But wishing you all a very Merry Christmas, and thank you very much for Future Men and to Katherine for making this happen. And very good to see usual suspects in the chat and participating.
Thank you very much, David.
And Andrew, I didn't see if there are other MPs because I can't see the whole list, but thank you to other MPs or members of the House of Lords if you have joined. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David, for chairing. I second his remarks. Thank everyone for attending. As mentioned, this recording will be, or a transcript of this recording will be added to our website as a record, and information about the next APPG, its topics and its dates will be sent out to everybody on the mailing list and on the Future Men's websites. If you have any recommendations or requests for areas which the APPG could explore, please do communicate with us at info@futuremen as the Secretariat. And I also wish you all a restful festive period and a happy new year. And let's hope 2021 brings about the changes we all hope to see. Thanks very much, everybody. Goodbye.
Thanks. Bye.
Goodbye.